Good morning. My apologies for the slight delay in getting started this morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Stefan, and I am MyGuru's director for online tutoring. And I'm here today to help everyone with a little bit of mental math. So there's a chat box, and I'm going to just put a welcome message down here, and welcome to the MyGuru GRE and GMAT mental math information session. You can feel free to reply to me in the chat box. I will solicit answers and questions from people as we go along. And so the first thing that I want to introduce here is to talk about calculators on the GRE and the GMAT. So can anyone tell me what is the situation with calculator on the GMAT? So can anybody tell me out there, what is the situation with the calculator on the GMAT?
What is your name? What
My name
is
is
your
Stefan.
name?
Yes, hello. My name is Stefan, and most everybody should be able to. And so I'm going to just mute everybody here just so that everyone can doesn't get overwhelmed. But the best way to go about this is probably going to be using the chat function. So I'm going to just go ahead and mute everybody. And so there is a chat function. You can reply to the chat box. And so can anybody tell me what is the situation with the calculator on the GMAT? Does anybody know what is the availability of calculator on the GMAT? Does anybody know? So on the GMAT, most people, oh, Amanda got it right. It's the IR section. Most people think that it is for the entire exam that you don't have a calculator on the GMAT, but you actually do get some semblance of a calculator. It's a very simple calculator, and it's going to be just for the integrated reasoning section. Now, what about on the GRE? What is the calculator situation for the GRE? Anybody know what the situation is for the calculator on the GRE? Does anybody know what the situation is with the calculator on the GRE? So with the GRE, you actually get a calculator. And throughout the exam, you have access to it. And this is what it looks like. You're going to get this delightful calculator on the GRE. It is what I like to call, my friend, the terrible calculator. This is all you're going for the GRE is this horrible calculator. And so that means that we want to avoid the terrible calculator as much as possible. So avoid unnecessary usage of the calculator whenever possible on either the GRE or the GMAT. And yes, there will be a recording of the meeting. Everyone will be emailed a copy of today's recording after processing later this week. So we want to avoid that calculator. So basically, we know that this goofy thing is to be avoided. Why is my so to be avoided? So instead, what we're going to do is we want to encourage good manual calculation. And so one thing to remember just about the manual calculation on these exams across the board is that basically the GRE and GMAT love calculations as simple factors, basically. So GRE and GMAT love calculations as simple factors. And so that means, as generally, break or chunk calculations into factors of 2, 5, 10, 100. So the exams really like these factors because we have 2 hands, we have 5 fingers, we have 10 fingers, we have everything into percentages. And that's going to make for easier calculations so that you can do mental math. Now, to facilitate and improve your mental math with what is known as mathaids.com. So mathaids.com is a free website we're going to go to here next, that just has a ton of practice problems. On the left-hand side, you see a whole bunch of worksheets by topic, and I don't know what just happened to my math aids. Oh, some sort of weird pop-up. So on the left-hand side, we can see things like multiplication. So multiplication is going to be the common thing that you'll be tasked to do. And so you can see some advanced timetables. You can do all sorts of practice problems here. Now, for the GRE, the advanced time drills are probably going to be sufficient. So if I click on the advanced time drills here, for instance, I can scroll down, I can select all of these factors. You see they're all selected. I can even do it in different languages if I'm so inclined. And then I click the big blue button that says create it, and I get a brand new worksheet of it. It's thinking. It's for whatever reason. There it goes. And so you can see a brand new drill of just times tables, and then down below we've got the answers. So this is the first step, is that you can improve your mental math here. And first ways to do it is by become proficient in calculating multiplication and division up to 15 squared and rooted, basically. So you should be able to do those sorts of calculations as quickly as possible so that you can not need to go to that calculator over and over again. Now, the GRE is really going to be, that's going to be sufficient. So this is GRE sufficient. Now, if you feel on the GMAT in particular that you complex calculations, then what you're going to do is you can come back over and you'll just keep on clicking back, and we can take a look at, say, these digit multiplication worksheets. And the horizontal ones are great. So if we just say each number has 1 or 2 digits, and again, we select all the details, we can click create. and we get a set of practice problems. Now, the nice thing about math aids is that you can see here the first question is 52 times 19. Well, if I click back, I click create it again, it's dynamically produced, so you'll never run out of math aid stuff. Although I did not select the right, and I gotta make sure that it doesn't lose my one or two digits, not just one digit. The single digit's probably a little too easy and won't we want with a sample here. So we're taking, let's go with that 75 times 20. So if we take, actually, let's go with something a little bit more complex. Let's go with 10 here, 97 times 32. So the way that you want to work through the calculation here is to break it into parts. So what that means is let's just give ourselves a little bit of room here and bring in that practice problem here of, and I'll have to zoom in a little bit. So where did my problem go? There he is. And so we'll make this bigger so that we can see it. Okay, so we've got this problem, and let's zoom out a bit. Go up, he went over there. Goodbye. So what we want to do in terms of our chunking is to just up so that, oops, where'd it go? Where's my cursor? Don't know why my board's a little weird. More. So let's just take a look at this guy. So can anybody tell me what would 32 times 100 be? So what would 32 times 100 be? So can anybody tell me what 32 times 100 would be? 3,200, right? That's pretty straightforward. So we've got 3,200. Well, we know that 32 times 97 is going to be equal to 32 times 100 minus 32 times 3. So what would 32 times 3 be if we just did that in our mind, in our heads? 96. So therefore, we know that 3,200 minus 96 is going to be equal to 32 times 97. So 3,200 minus 96 is going to be 3,104. We were able to do what looks like a very difficult manual calculation pretty quickly. Any questions about this manual calculation technique of just find an easy factor of 100 in this case, round it up, get it to 3,200, subtract out 32 times 3, and we've got 32 times 97 or 97 times 32 pretty directly. So for more difficult multiplication, you can use that, and I got to remember what the worksheet is called again. It's the here digit multiplication, single or multiple digit multiplication worksheets. So beyond that kind of manual calculation of the what's the word I'm looking for, of multiplication and division here that we just saw, there are some things that you want to do manually with equal ability. So everything when it comes to the mental math, as far as it pertains to non-integers, is what I like to call becoming math ambidextrous and capable of multiplying, well, of processing non-integers as fractions, decimals, and percents. Now, when it comes, oops, I'll leave that thing there. So why won't it let me select? I don't know why it won't let me select here. Oh, yeah, just lock those two objects. There we go. And so, taking a look at integers or non-integer calculations. So why won't it let me? Now it won't let me actually edit it. All right, well that's kind of, but nonetheless. So beyond decimals and percents, when it comes to the GRE decimals and percents can be addressed with the calculator. So when you're dealing with the calculator, decimals and percents are pretty easy, but fractions are more difficult because you don't want to use their terrible calculators interesting, like, parentheses. The parentheses, you don't want to touch those parentheses. They're pretty useless. So instead, just use the, pardon me, use these techniques for manual calculation. So if we're trying, and we'll just put over here, to manipulate fractions, one of the easiest things that you can do with fractions is to take a fraction of a whole. So this we'll call taking fractions of wholes. If you're going to take a fraction of a whole, step one is going to be to to divide the whole by the denominator. Step two is going to be to multiply that result by the numerator. And this is going to be your easiest way to manipulate a fraction. And generally, if you're talking about mental math, you want to seek methods of reducing your values first before increasing them. Because again, smaller numbers are easier to process. So for instance, let's just say we wanted to take 3/5 of 120. So first, we want to find out what is 120 divided by 5. So what is 120 divided by 5? So who can tell me what is 120 divided by 5? Anyone? 24. It is 24. And the same way as we just did with the chunking before, you can possibly say that you can multiply both by 2, because 240 divided by 10 is going to be equal to 120 divided by 5, which is equal to 24. So then I know that my product or my quotient of 24, I need to take 24 and multiply that by 3, which is of course going to give me 72, and 72 is going to be 3/5 of 120. Any questions about taking fractions of whole numbers? So the next topic we'll talk about is going to be percentages, because percents are basically how like medieval merchants would calculate things in their head. So this is going to be manipulating, or manually manipulating, or mentally, I suppose, mentally manipulating percents. So with percents, you basically, for step one, you want to take 10% or 1% of a value by shifting the decimal left 1 or 2 places, respectively. Then step two is going to be to multiply or divide as needed to reach the exact sought percentage proportionally. So, for instance, we just saw with 120, right? So let's take another example of 120. So, for instance, let's try, let's go with 8% of 120. Actually, let me go with, let's go with an easier one. We'll go with 8% of 200 to start. So let's see how we can figure out what 8% of 200 is. First, what is 1% of 200? So what is 1% of 200? 2. Yeah, so we got a 2. So that means that 1% is equal to 2. And then what must we multiply 1% by to reach 8% proportionally? Got to multiply by 8. So then we take that 1% of 200 equals 2, and we're going to multiply that by 8 to figure out that 16 is 8% of 200. And you can either multiply or divide to reach these percentages proportionally. So another one, for instance, if I wanted to know 15% of, say, let's go with 15% of, we'll go with 700. So we know that 10% of 700 would be equal to what? So what is 10% of 700? Not 10%. 10% is not going to be 7. So 7D, yes. So 10% of 700 is going to be 7D. So then what is 5% of 700 going to be? Because what is 5? Yep, 35 is going to be right, because 5% of 700 is equal to 1/2 times 10% of 700. So that's going to be equal to 35. And then we know that 15% is equal to 10% plus, which is to tell me that it's 70 plus 35, which is equal to 105, is 15% of 700. Excuse me. And so that's how you can mentally manipulate percentages. And these are another thing that if you practice the mental manipulation of the percentages, you'll quickly eliminate the need to go into our friend the Terry calculator, because he is, again, to be avoided. So those are some of the top line, like, mental calculation things that you'll want to do. So we started off chunking for a problem such as 97 by 32. We talked about taking fractions of wholes by doing the denominator first, manually manipulating the percentages using that technique. Now, last thing, and it's not so much of a manual manipulation thing, but that you'll want to work on as it pertains to math aids, is that you'll want to practice exponents, exponential, and radical manipulation. Because here, you basically have to recognize that exponents and radicals can be manipulated by multiplying, dividing, or factoring as normal if you keep the common exponent or radical sign. So, for instance, here, as a sample, we'll just come, just come back. Grab my map here. Over here. So, as far as manipulating exponents, so common exponents and roots. So, if we have, let's just say, 4 to the third times 3 to the third, we can just combine pieces but keep the exponents. So what is 4 times 3? $12. And so we've got 12 to the third. And if we wanted to expand it, we know that 4 to the third, 4, so 4 to the third equal to 64. 3 to the third is equal to 27. And try to think about a manual manipulation that would allow me to do 64 times 27 if I were so inclined. And I know that 64 times 30 is going to be equal to 640. So that's going to be 18, 19, 20. And then I can subtract out 64 times 3, 12 plus, so 192. So 192, and that's going to get me 1920 minus 192. So that's 1720 plus 8, and that's going to be 1728. And 1728, sure enough, if we did 12 times 12, well, that's going to be 140 plus 12, and that's going to be equal to 1440 plus 288, and of course, n is 1728. You can see mental manipulation will work even for exponents and roots. Now, if you're looking to do it with a radical, so and I'll dive into my slightly goofy this morning pen tool, and we've got the square root of, let's say, 80. Oh, I somehow ended up with that smart drawing on because I think that's the thing that's causing weird stuff. So the square root of 80 divided by the square root of 5. So what would the square root, what is 8 divided by 5 equal to? So what is 80 divided by 5? And long division is probably the one thing that I would say is not nearly as time consuming as you might think. And probably the number one thing that I would recommend potentially writing out will be long division. 80 and 5 goes into 8 once. Subtract out your 5. 5 goes into 36 times. So our answer to the 80 divided by 5 is going to be a root of 16, which, of course, if we apply that through as a perfect square, is equal to 4. So you can manipulate common exponents and roots following these rules as well. Keep the exponent or the radical consistent, and you can manipulate in this fashion. So as far as our, that's the top 6 pieces that I would recommend is through the mental math of multiplication, division, talking about becoming math ambidextrous with fractions, decimals, and percents, practicing the exponents and radicals. You also can add any other topics you know you need work on from these exams, whether it's the GRE or the GMAT. The content is pretty much the same. Basically, you're looking at arithmetic, algebra, word problems, and geometry. And that's a pretty good summary and a good place to kind of open up the room to questions. So, any questions regarding mental math from the group? And again, you can, at this time, open up your audio if you'd like to ask anything over the microphone, or you can just ask any questions in the chat box as you'd like. Yes, I will be sending out the, so the slide will be accessible to everyone along with the recording via email by the end of the week. And it is definitely a skill, mentally manipulating things, that you can build with practice. The more you practice these tactics and these sorts of skills, whether it's percents, fractions, multiplication, division, exponents, radicals, the more practice you do, the more quick you'll be with doing it, is basically kind of the way it works. So you can see that even with something like 1440 plus 288, way that the mind can work through it more quickly is by rounding, because I know that 1440 plus 300 is going to be 1740, and then I just have to take the 12 off from 300 to get to 288, and that gets me to my 1728. So there's a lot of practice, and we already said that we want to avoid that terrible calculator whenever we can, until you are certain about your calculations on the GRE. Use the calculator to avoid unforced errors. Any other questions specific to mental math or anything else about the GRE or the GMAT? Going once. Going twice. Well, then, thank you everyone for joining this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, or evening in the world. And please do reply to me via email with any additional questions I might be able to help answer. And your GRE or GMAT journeys.